Welcome back. In this video, you are going to understand about annotation-driven transactions. In earlier video, you understood about programmatic transactions, and I hope it was very clear. Now, I'm going to turn the same use case into annotation-driven. So, firstly, I need to configure transaction manager like earlier. So, let me do that. Since I'm using JDBC, I have to configure data source transaction manager. Let me configure it. Data source transaction manager. I'll give the ID. Then it is dependent on data source. I'll inject it. Then first step is done. Then what I have to do is, wherever I want a transaction, I need to annotate that method with transactional. I want transaction for debit method as well. So I will annotate. Then I want transaction for audit service as well. I'll annotate it with transactional. Okay, I have done. But who will create the proxies? Whenever I ask for context.getBean bank service IMPL, I need to get a transactional proxy, is it? So this is the original bank service. Whenever I say context.getBean bank service, I should get a proxy, a transactional proxy. Whenever I call a method on the proxy should invoke a transaction advice, which will start a transaction and then invoke your bank service methods. So who will create proxies normally? In AOP we have understood. Second type of bean post process will create proxies. So I have to define that bean post processor. I don't need to remember the class name. I can just use tx namespace colon annotation driven. So whenever I write tx namespace colon annotation driven, the corresponding bean post processor, which will recognize transactional annotations, will be automatically configured. That's it. I am done. And one more thing is, for this transaction colon tx colon annotation driven, I need to give the reference of transaction manager. My transaction manager bean name is data source transaction manager. I have to give it. But if you have, make sure that ID is same as transaction manager exactly, you don't need to give this, right? So I followed the convention, I didn't give it. Now let us test if transactions work. So see what I'm doing. I'm transferring from one account to other, and inside test infrastructure config, the script is getting executed. Let me go to database and drop this Spring DB. I will recreate it. Now the database is empty. The tables will be automatically created by this script. Now let me run and check. I'm transferring 1000 from account number 1 to account number 2. No exceptions, so everything should have gone fine. Everything should have been committed. Let us see the account. See, 9000, 1000 has been transferred. Transaction entries are there. What about audit logs? Audit logs are also present. Now let us simulate a scenario of exception. In our account service, in credit method, I am throwing an exception. If true, I am throwing my own runtime exception. I am throwing a runtime exception. This is my own runtime exception. I am just throwing it. Let us see what will happen. So let me run. My test case failed because of my runtime exception. And let me see, check here in account. Is 1000 transferred? No. In transaction detail, are there entries? No. In outlogs? No. So the whole transaction has been rolled back because of exception. right? But one thing is, I want audit logs to present in any case, whether the exception, whether the transaction, the original transaction rolls back or not. I want the logs in the audit logs. So that means this method should run in a separate transaction. So I need to specify propagation behavior. How to specify here like this? Propagation is equals to requires underscore new. So earlier in programmatic transaction also you understood about what is the meaning of this requires underscore new. That means we are telling that we require a new transaction. Okay. So for others, for bank service and all, I didn't specify transaction propagation behavior. If you don't specify, the default propagation behavior is required. Required means if there is no existing transaction, a transaction will be started. If there is an existing transaction, this method also will continue with existing transaction. So if you don't define anything, that's one. Okay, so let me test now. I will run the same test case. Because of exception now, everything should roll back. Let me check. See, the amount was not transferred. In transaction detail table also nothing is there. But in audit logs table, see, these entries are there until exception. So the audit log, write audit log method is running in a separate transaction. So now you understood how to specify the propagation behavior. Similarly, if you want to specify isolation behavior, you can specify isolation behavior. Here I am not going to discuss about what is the meaning of each isolation level. Your database administrator will be a good person to decide what isolation level will be sufficient for your scenario. Ask the database administrator and then come and configure. You just need to know how to configure. Then, if you want to specify timeout for your transactions, these are you can specify timeout. And if you want to specify transaction as read only, you can specify the transaction as read only like this. And next, one more important thing. If you have worked with any declarative transaction mechanism, like if you have worked with EJBs also provide declarative transaction manager, is it? Transaction management, or we call them as CMT, container managed transactions. Any container managed transactions will roll back only for runtime exceptions. For compile time exceptions, that means for checked exceptions, the exceptions will not be, the transactions will not be rolled back, because checked exceptions are supposed to be handled by you. So remember, rollback will happen only for runtime exceptions and not for checked exceptions. But sometimes I may want to override the defaults. I may want to say, don't roll back for a particular runtime exception. Now let me check. I'm throwing which exception? My runtime exception. I don't want to roll back for this exception. By default, it will roll back for all runtime exceptions. I want to override the rollback rules. So I'll specify here, no rollback for, no rollback for is taking what is equals to, I can pass an array of throwable classes. So an array, I'll say my runtime exception dot class. Let us check. So for this exception, no rollback should happen. That means everything should be committed. So let me check. Because of exception, my test case failed. That's okay. Let me check in database, in account. Oh, is it committed or not? It has been rolled back. It has been rolled back and nothing is there. Audit logs are also rolled back. Wait a minute. To audit service, I said requires new. Oh, I said read only. Yeah. Okay. Okay. I removed that read only. And all I said requires new, and here I specified no rollback for my runtime exception. Looks fine. Now let me run again. So exception has occurred. Let me check now. Alt logs are there, and whatever is in debit method has not been committed. Wait, whatever has been in debit method, first I debited. It should have been updated, and let me just try once more. I'll configure no rollback for here as well, and also here as well. Let me check now. Okay, so again in account, yeah, okay, so I have overridden the rollback rules by specifying no rollback for here, no rollback for my runtime exception. So this has been committed, and exceptions occurred in credit method. This statement was not executed, so I don't see that amount is created, debited but not created. So you understood how to override the rollback rules. Similarly, if you want to roll back for a particular checked exception, you can specify rollback for, by default for checked exceptions, rollback will not be happening. If you want to roll back for a particular checked exception, you can specify here. So that's how you can override the rollback rules. Okay. Now let me again make it normal. I will remove all. I would like to show you one more interesting things. Okay, see here, in test case I might be writing a lot of tests. Because the first test has been successful, second test should not be affected, is it? So if I allow the first test to modify the database, because of that my second test may fail, is it? So what I want is whatever has been done inside this test method, everything should be rolled back finally. So I'll annotate this with transactional. So if I annotate it with transactional, everything will be rolled back. Let me check. I'll remove this. So the meaning of transaction is different in test cases. Everything will be rolled back. Let me check. I will not throw an exception in credit method. And in audit log also, I don't want a new transaction. Let it be as normal. Let us see what will happen. The test case is successful, but now see the database. Everything has been rolled back. You don't see any entries. Everything has been rolled back, because if everything has been committed, just because first test was successful, the first test might have updated some rows entries in a database, second test may fail because of it. So to avoid all such things, in test cases we use a transactional annotation, right? So till now you have seen annotation driven transactions. Suppose if I don't want to use annotations, I want to use XML driven annotations. So how to do it? Let us see. This is the same use case. If you see my bank service IMPL, I don't have transaction annotation. Account service, I don't have transaction annotation. I'm not using annotation driven transactions. I want to use XML driven transactions. So how to achieve it? Very simple. Again, here you need to configure the transaction manager as usual. And now earlier when I want annotation driven transactions, I wrote tx colon annotation driven. Don't write it. Now what I have to do is I define my own transaction advice by using namespace. Transaction advice I am defining id is equals to say tx advice. Okay. Then transaction manager reference I am giving the same reference. Then inside this I am writing tx attributes, transaction attributes. Now for which method? For audit log, write audit log method, I want requires underscore new, is it? For write audit log method, I want propagation is equals to requires underscore new. And for rest all methods, I want propagation is equals to required star. For all other methods, I am saying propagation is equals to required. And of course, here only I can specify isolation, no rollback for read only, timeout, etc. Whatever I have shown using annotations, you can configure everything here. See, this information is nothing but whatever you are specifying using annotations. For write audit log, I want a new propagation, and for all others, rest all required. I have an advice. Will the proxy be created automatically? No. I need to define a point cut and an aspect, is it? So what I'll do is I'll go to namespaces and I'll import AOP namespace. Then you know already how to configure an aspect using XML. AOP colon config. Okay. Then AOP colon advisor. Advisor is nothing but a combination of point cut and advice. So advisor ref is equals to tx advice, then point cut is equals to where I want it to be applied for all methods for a method whose name is transfer execution of star space transfer of dot dot. This is one method which I want, and all methods of account service IMPL, is it? Or I'm using again execution of star space account service IMPL. In which package is it present? com.waitlearn.service com.waitlearn.service dot account service IMPL dot star, or again audit service dot star. Okay, dot star of dot dot. Here also of dot dot. That's it. So I have configured an advisor, so proxies will be automatically created. Let us check. I have a test case again here. Let me run. In this case everything is going fine. I should see everything is committed. Okay, I think in here exception is done. Okay, So now everything should have been rolled back. Let me check. See, everything has been rolled back. Nothing. But audit logs have been committed. So let me just modify here for write audit log also. I'll say required. Now let me run the test case. I should not see audit logs as well. Refresh. See, account, it has been rolled back. In transaction there are no entries. In audits, nothing. So for audit also required is applied. So you see that transactions are working even without annotations. These are XML driven transactions. Whatever we are doing with annotations, we are doing the same with XML. So hope you understood about transactions. In next modules, in next videos, whenever I am discussing about integration with Hibernate, I will show you how to use and configure Hibernate Transaction Manager. And also whenever I integrate with JPA, I will show you how to integrate with JPA Transaction Manager, etc. For now, we are done with transactions. Now we have a lab exercise, two lab exercises, one for annotation driven transactions and one for XML driven transactions. Go through them and complete the exercises.